Aftermath. India. Despite the declaration of a ceasefire, India was perceived by many as the victor, due to its success in halting the Pakistan-backed insurgency in Kashmir. 35. In its October 1965 issue, The Time magazine quoted a Western official assessing the consequences of the war. 196. Now, it's apparent to everybody that India is going to emerge as an Asian power in its own right. In light of the failures of the Sino-Indian War, the outcome of the 1965 war was viewed as a politico-strategic victory for India. The Indian Prime Minister Lal Bahadur Shastri was hailed as a national hero in India. 197. While the overall performance of the Indian military was praised, military leaders were criticized for their failure to effectively deploy India's superior armed forces to achieve a decisive victory over Pakistan. 198. In his book War in the Modern World Since 1815, noted war historian Jeremy Black said that though Pakistan lost heavily during the 1965 war, India's hasty decision to call for negotiations prevented further considerable damage to the Pakistan armed forces. He elaborates. 199. India's Chief of Army Staff urged negotiations on the ground that they were running out of ammunition and their number of tanks had become seriously depleted. In fact, the army had used less than 15% of its ammunition compared to Pakistan, which had consumed closer to 80%, and India had double the number of serviceable tanks. In 2015, Marshal of the Indian Air Force Arjun Singh, the last surviving armed force commander of the conflict, gave his assessment that the war ended in a stalemate, but only due to international pressure for a ceasefire, and that India would have achieved a decisive victory had hostilities continued for a few days more. 200. For political reasons, Pakistan claims victory in the 1965 war. In my opinion, the war ended in a kind of stalemate. We were in a position of strength. Had the war continued for a few more days, we would have gained a decisive victory. I advised then Prime Minister Lal Bahadur Shastri not to agree to a ceasefire, but I think he was pressured by the United Nations and some countries. As a consequence, India focused on enhancing communication and coordination within and among the tri-services of the Indian Armed Forces, partly as a result of the inefficient information gathering preceding the war. India established the Research and Analysis Wing for External Espionage and Intelligence. Major improvements were also made in command and control to address various shortcomings, and the positive impact of these changes was clearly visible during the Indo-Pakistani War of 1971, when India achieved a decisive victory over Pakistan within 2 weeks. China's repeated threats to intervene in the conflict, supporting Pakistan, increased pressure on the government to take an immediate decision to develop nuclear weapons. 201. Despite repeated assurances, the United States did little to prevent extensive use of American arms by Pakistani forces during the conflict, thus irking India. 202. At the same time, the United States and United Kingdom refused to supply India with sophisticated weaponry, which further strained the relations between the West and India. 203. These developments led to a significant change in India's foreign policy. India, which had previously championed the cause of non-alignment, distanced itself further from Western powers and developed close relations with the Soviet Union. By the end of the 1960s, the Soviet Union emerged as the biggest supplier of military hardware to India. 204. From 1967 to 1977, 81% of India's arms imports were from the Soviet Union. 205. After the 1965 war, the arms race between India and Pakistan became even more asymmetric, and India was outdistancing Pakistan by far. 206. India's defense budget too would increase gradually after the war. In 19,661,967, it would rise to 17%, and by 19,701,971, it would rise to 25% of its revenue. 2007. However, according to the World Bank data, India's defense expenditure by GDP decreased from 3.871% in 1965 to 3.141% in 1969, thereafter slightly increased to 3.652% in 1971. 2008. Pakistan. After the war, a significant number of Pakistanis regarded their military performance to be positive. In Pakistan, 6 September is celebrated as Defense Day to remember how Lahore was able to defend itself against the Indian Army. The performance of the Pakistani Air Force was particularly praised. The Pakistani government was accused of spreading misinformation about the consequences of the war among its citizens. 2009. In his book Mainsprings of Indian and Pakistani Foreign Policies, S. M. Burke writes 146. After the Indo-Pakistani War of 1965, the balance of military power had decisively shifted in favor of India. Pakistan had found it difficult to replace the heavy equipment lost during that conflict, while her adversary, despite her economic and political problems, had been determinedly building up her strength. Air Marshal retired Nur Khan, who headed the Pakistan Air Force in 1965, said in an interview with Dawn newspaper 210. The army misled the nation with the big lie that India rather than Pakistan provoked the war, and that Pakistan won a great victory. And since the lie was never rectified, the Pakistani army came to believe it's fiction and has continued to fight unwanted wars. Pakistani commentator Haidar Imtiaz remarked, 211. The myth of victory was created after the war had ended, to counter Indian claims of victory, on the one hand, and to shield the Ayub regime and the army from criticism, on the other. A book titled Indo-Pakistan War of 1965, a flashback, 212, produced by the Inter-Services Public Relations of Pakistan, is used as the official history of the war, which omits any mention of the operations Gibraltar and Grand Slam, and begins with the Indian counter-offensive on the Lahore front. The Pakistan Army is claimed to have put up a valiant defense of the motherland and forced the attack in its tracks. 211. Most people agree that the idea of a mobile, hard-hitting Pakistan army was badly hurt during the war because important breakthroughs were not made. 213. The military's ill-founded belief that their martial race of soldiers could defeat Hindu India in the conflict was criticized by several Pakistani writers. 214-215. Rasul Buks Rais, a Pakistani political analyst, wrote 216. The 1965 war with India proved that Pakistan could neither break the formidable Indian defenses in an intense, violent military campaign fashion, nor could she sustain an all-out conflict for long. Historian Akbar S. Zaidi notes that Pakistan lost terribly in the 1965 war. 217. The Pakistani Air Force, on the other hand, racked up considerable acclaim and esteem among the military and international warfare critics for its triumphant defense of Lahore and other crucial parts of the country and its hefty retaliation against India the day afterward. The Air Force's vigilance was also influenced by the fact that some pilots were frantically enlisted 6 times in a single hour when they detected Indian air raids. In Pakistan, the Air Force and Army are honored on Defense Day and Air Force Day. These days are on September 6 and 7, respectively. 218-219. Furthermore, Pakistan had lost more ground than it had gained during the conflict. And perhaps even more crucial, it had failed to secure Kashmir. Many people consider this outcome to be a setback for Pakistan. The faulty planning of Operation Gibraltar was criticized by senior Pakistani officials and military experts, which ultimately led to the conflict. The Tashkent Declaration was also criticized in Pakistan, even though few people were aware of the seriousness of the situation at the end of the conflict. Political leaders were also subjected to criticism. Ayub Khan had espoused high expectations among the Pakistani populace regarding the superiority if not invincibility, of its armed forces. 220 In accordance with the guidance of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, the Foreign Minister of Pakistan. Nonetheless, the failure of Pakistan to attain its military objectives during the conflict resulted in a political liability for IUB. 221 After the defeat of its Kashmiri ambitions, an increasingly vocal opposition challenged the army's invincibility. 222 The economic contraction in Pakistan was one of the most significant outcomes of the conflict. 223-224 Pakistan had experienced impressive economic growth since the early 1960s, but the war ended that. Between 1964 and 1966, Pakistan's defense spending rose from 4.82% to 9.86% of GDP, putting a tremendous strain on its economy. In 1970-71, the expenditure on defense accounted for a staggering 30-207 or 55.66% of the total government expenditure. 225 According to veterans of the war greatly cost Pakistan economically, politically, and militarily. 226 Nuclear theorist Feroz Khan maintained that the 1965 war was a last conventional attempt to snatch Kashmir by military force. And Pakistan's own position in the international community, especially with the United States, began to deteriorate from the point the war started, while on the other hand, the alliance with China saw improvements. 226 Chairman Joint Chiefs General Tariq Majid claims in his memoirs that Zhou Enlai had long advised the government, in the classic style of Sun Tzu, to go slow, not to push India hard, and avoid a fight over Kashmir for at least 20-30 years, until you have developed your economy and consolidated your national power. 226 General Majid maintained in Eating Grass that the sane, philosophical and political critical thinking was missing in Pakistan, and that the country had lost extensive human resources by fighting the war. 226 Pakistan was surprised by the lack of support from the United States, an ally with whom the country had signed an agreement of cooperation. The US turned neutral in the war when it cut off military supplies to Pakistan and India. Citation needed an action that the Pakistanis took as a sign of betrayal. 227 After the war, Pakistan would increasingly look towards China as a major source of military hardware and political support. Another negative consequence of the war was growing resentment against the Pakistani government. In East Pakistan, present-day Bangladesh, 174 particularly for West Pakistan's obsession with Kashmir. 228 Bengali leaders accused the central government of not providing adequate security for East Pakistan during the conflict, even though large sums of money were taken from the East to finance the war for Kashmir. 229 In fact, despite some Pakistan Air Force attacks being launched from bases in East Pakistan during the war, India did not retaliate in that sector. 230 Although East Pakistan was defended only by an understrengthened infantry division, 14th Division, 16 planes, and no tanks. 231 Sheikh Mujibur Rahman was critical of the disparity in military resources deployed in East and West Pakistan, calling for greater autonomy for East Pakistan, an action that ultimately led to the Bangladesh Liberation War and another war between India and Pakistan in 1971. Pakistan celebrates Defense Day every year to commemorate September 6, 1965, to pay tribute to the soldiers killed in the war. 232 However, Pakistani journalists, including Taha Siddiqui, 233, and Hasib Asif, 234, have criticized the celebration of Defense Day. Awards. National Awards. Santu Jaharmal Shahani, an IF's officer, served as the first Indian Director General Ordnance Factories (JOF). He was awarded Padma Bhushan by the Government of India in the Civil Service category. 235. K. C. Banerjee, an IF's officer, received Padma Shri in 1967 for his contributions during the Indo-Pakistani War of 1965. As the general manager of Rifle Factory Ishapur, 236 that developed and manufactured the 7.62 self-loading automatic rifle that played decisive role in India's victory in the Indo-Pakistani War of 1965. 237238239-40. Joginder Singh Dhillon, Lt. Gen. Awarded the Padma Bhushan in 1966 by the Government of India for his role in the 1965 war, 241, becoming the first Indian Army officer to receive the award. 242. Gallantry Awards. For bravery, the following soldiers were awarded the highest gallantry award of their respective countries: the Indian Award Param Veer Chakra and the Pakistani Award Nishan-e-Haider, India. Company Quartermaster Havildar Abdul Hamid to 43 posthumous. Lieutenant Colonel Ardashir Burzorji Tarapower to 43 posthumous. Pakistan. Major Raja Aziz Bhatti Shaheed to 44 posthumous. Battle Honors. After the war, a total of 16 Battle Honors and 3 Theatre Honors were awarded to units of the Indian Army, the notable among which are Jammu and Kashmir 1965 Theatre Honor, Punjab 1965 Theatre Honor, Rajasthan 1965 Theatre Honor, Salutter, Burki, Dagrai, Hajipur, Hassanila, Kalathur, Uphill, Philora,